Hello. How you guys doing? Cool, cool. Thanks for that introduction. I was about to basically just go into it. So I think, yeah, I think as I've been introduced, my name is Lerato Bodibe, founder and CEO of ROCVEST. We are obviously management consultants. We work in a very niche space where we assist a lot of companies. This is primarily big companies with digital transformation mandates. And this basically goes down to understanding or assisting them with the digital transformation issues that they might be having over time. A lot of companies which are big companies, they might obviously be set in their ways from a strategy perspective, from a processes perspective, from how they've been doing things. And it becomes very cumbersome and sophisticated to basically implement a lot of technologies and understanding how they can basically better their processes. That's where we basically come in. We obviously work within the fintech space as well, where we assist a lot of startups with their digital transformation exercises, in essence, as we basically confirm or rather call them. And within that space, there's a lot of work that we do with the finances, payments, understanding KYC. A lot of startups, obviously, coming up, they don't know what they don't know. A lot of the work that we do comes from and is underpinned by governance, risk, and compliance. We basically ensure that from a cybersecurity perspective, from a TPP compliance perspective, all the legal requirements are obviously set and so forth. We obviously have our own startup as well called Schedule Pay, which is a fintech company / SaaS company as well. And we're obviously looking into how we can assist with cross-border remittance, assisting a lot of companies as well with how they basically attempt to basically take in payments and basically facilitate all the entire journey in that space, from ensuring that they get cash flow positive statements and so forth. So I think having said that, I think with a show of hands, please don't shout it out. Can anyone please tell me what number is behind that vehicle? Please raise your hand if you know the answer. Don't shout it out. Yes? Why 87? But the numbers are going 06, 68, 88, 98 though.
Yep, it's if you look how the car is parked, it will be 86, 87, 88, 89, and 90.
So it was basically upside down.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I think a lot of people obviously didn't get that to a certain degree.
No, I did not.
Well done on that. So I think with this basically comes, we need to understand how certain problems can be looked at. Looking at a problem in the normal way of looking at things might basically need a level of change. We need to think out of the box in essence. And a lot of companies are obviously struggling with how they can approach certain processes or certain processes that they might be facing. And I would like everyone to just have that mindset. I'm going to basically take you through a presentation that is a bit unorthodox to a certain degree. And it just basically means that we need to start thinking differently in terms of how we obviously approach certain situations or issues that we might obviously be experiencing within the banking space, within the financial spaces, but also just understanding how everything basically operates from a normal human being and processes perspective. I'm going to start off with a story as well. I basically have a helper, and her name is Martha. She's been working for me for quite a long time now. It's about, I think, about 4 years or so. She doesn't do work for myself only. She actually does work for other people as well. So I basically pay her for a few days when she comes through. And she's obviously from Zimbabwe. She has a daughter that side, and she basically ensures that she sends money to her sister so that they can basically have food and the likes. And this is the story of a lot of people in South Africa, where they obviously have to send money across to their countries, etc. On the 1st of December, I gave her a bonus. It was a good bonus, I might say. And with that money, she basically went out and bought a lot of clothes, food, groceries, etc., so that she can obviously send it home. As you know, there are issues with exchange rates and so forth, certain items not being available in other countries, South Africa being fortunate to a certain degree. You'll get a lot of things this side, and then obviously you'll have to then send it across. But now, as you might be aware, there's a lot of buses that send goods across, cross-border in essence. What she did, she basically took everything, put it into the bus, packed everything that she had, took all the money that she's been saving over time, including the bonus, and put the entire amount in a plastic bag and basically hid it in their luggage. The bus basically departed on the 1st of December, and as you know, December is a very hectic time, and the bus arrived in Zimbabwe on the 22nd of December. When the bus arrived, she received a call from her sister, and the luggage was not there. Everything was gone. She contacted the bus operators to find out basically what's happening. This was basically a few days before Christmas, and the bus operators basically decided to obviously take leave and also attend to their families and so forth. But with Martha, in this case, her family didn't have anything for Christmas. She went back to the bus operators after Christmas when they did open. She basically tried by all means to try and get her luggage, but there was no guarantee that the luggage would obviously arrive. This is all her savings that she's been saving over time. This is the entire bonus that she received. These are school clothes for the child to basically go to school with in the following year. Now, this is a story of a lot of South Africans, a lot of African countries, obviously, where certain people obviously will work in a different country, they have to send money home. But with this, what does it mean for the banking industry? Why can't you send money through a bank? We have innovative solutions like Mukuru and the likes and so forth. Why can't those systems basically be utilized and so forth? There's a lot of fintech companies that have obviously come up over time and assisting in this space of basically cross-border remittance or basically moving monies around. But what are the challenges? Number one, there'd obviously be an issue of infrastructure. Infrastructure basically means that even if you do send money from this side to a different country, if there's no banking infrastructure in that country or in the rural areas of whichever country it is, you might obviously have problems basically receiving that money or even attempting to send money across to a different country. This is the same within the country as well. We still do have rural areas where a lot of people have to walk long distances, kilometers, to basically get to an ATM. How do we assist those people in this space? I'm going to have a lot of questions that will be coming out of the presentation. Yes, there's solutions, but are the solutions effective and are they really working in this regard? Malawi has an average of 67% of its adult population being unbanked. 70% of them are women. In South Africa, an average of 84% of the population is banked. So there's a smaller amount of people that are obviously unbanked in South Africa. Now, how do you find a solution that will cater to both countries? The entire country, or rather the entire continent, has multiple issues of this magnitude and discrepancies in essence. Can you create a solution that will basically assist both countries, other countries, which have their own dynamics? How do you approach those engagements in essence? We were in Malawi, and I was there about 3 or 4 months ago. We met with a tech startup, which is basically a fintech company, and they were assisted by the Malawi bank to basically approve them in this regard to be a payments aggregator, where they had a system that allows them to basically move monies around. Now, if you are not aware, the likes of Malawi and similar to other countries as well, they don't have credit lines. When you buy things, you have to buy them in cash. A lot of money around those countries, you basically have to have physical cash, or there's mobile money that obviously resides in those countries. In South Africa, on the other hand, I'm able to send money from my Standard Bank account to my ABSA account or FNB or whatever the case might be. They don't necessarily have that luxury. With over 80% or so of the population being unbanked, how do you move money? How do you transact? How do you ensure that you are able to get money or get goods from different areas and the likes? We ended up at a filling station or a petrol station. This was around 9 o'clock at night. We basically were coming back from a conference that we had attended that side. We got to the garage. I have my ATM card, and obviously in South Africa we tap. We got to the filling station and they didn't have a speed point. There was no bank around to go and withdraw money. These are challenges that not only Malawi faces, but a lot of countries basically face. You move from one country, in another country, it's completely different. When I left South Africa, I was in Namibia a few months before that. I was able to tap with no problems. Movement was okay. But just another neighboring country, we basically have issues in that regard. Now, there's a whole concept around open banking, which I'm an advocate for, because obviously within this space, you are able to open up how the banking system basically functions and basically extend or expand the movement of money in that regard, and the services, obviously, with regards to the space. From the likes of payments, lending, investments, as well as digital banking, how can we ensure that somebody in a rural space basically is able to move money or send money across through their phone? But now, if obviously the entire ecosystem around the bank has certain constraints and the likes, it basically becomes quite difficult to ensure that we're able to expand at a good rate at that as well. And with this, we've actually been in multiple conversations, panel discussions as well, where obviously the banks over time have been resistant to this. Now, how does a bank become resilient in terms of ensuring that instead of seeing fintech as a threat, they see it as an opportunity to basically assist them where they can't obviously implement certain infrastructure and they can't obviously implement certain processes to ensure that more and more people are banked, to ensure that the security from a person's money, in essence, that sits either underneath a mattress in nowadays, but how do we then ensure that we can get to a point where cash is not necessarily the main medium of transacting in any country, including South Africa? I created a post about a week ago, and a lot of South Africans receive their money into their bank account. However, immediately when it arrives, they withdraw it. About 50% of South Africans literally withdraw their entire salary once they receive it in their bank account because they prefer to use cash. How do we create solutions to basically assist in these type of environments? How do we change the mindset in this regard becomes another question. Now, within the fintech space, where there's obviously open APIs that can obviously be integrated into multiple banks, this space is quite rigorous. Another example of Malawi, there's a reason why I'm speaking about Malawi, and I'll unpack that a bit shortly. Being in Malawi, where the entire population basically transacts through their telephone, telecommunications that side basically have become the banks of that country. This is the same with any other country except for South Africa as an example. Kenya, they have similar systems. Nigeria, same thing. They're obviously adopting. In South Africa, a lot of people are more resistant to basically opening a bank account or an account that they can store money in that is not affiliated with an actual bank. But other countries are open to that. But now, how do we ensure that from ensuring from the south of the continent to the north, that there are processes that assist us in growing the financial landscape? How do banks become resilient? How does the financial sector become resilient in terms of opening up and assisting fintech companies to assist them in that regard? So with this can obviously come enhanced access to financial services. This comes down from an insurance company being able to connect to a bank and the likes. Yes, there's been some strides in South Africa to a certain degree, but not all opportunities or services are obviously open in this space. But now, how do we ensure that we are able to get to that space? Low barriers of entry. There's a lot of governance, which I'll touch on a bit shortly. And then obviously integration with local economies. This is where you know that a micro lender or something can be able to assess somebody's credit score instead of basically relying either on the banks or the credit companies that we obviously have in the country. Because there's no other way to do that if a person does not have a bank account, does not have an account or a loyalty program in essence to basically assist them in that regard. We have an innovation called Schedule Pay, as I've mentioned earlier. And with this platform, we're obviously trying to assist a lot of companies with cash flow issues. A lot of companies, and I'll take it to an extreme example where a therapist, as an example, if you're a therapist, you basically section out your day. Each hour you have a patient, but if that patient basically cancels an hour before, or rather 5 minutes before the appointment, you are basically going to lose out on that money. How do we then ensure that you are able to get that money upfront 2 weeks before the appointment and ensure that there's the right compliance or terms and conditions that restrict you from actually getting that money out, where you can actually just, in essence, just reschedule or basically forfeit the entire amount. Now, with a therapist, it's something different. With the local economies that we have in South Africa, which is primarily the informal market, if you're a hair salon, you'll always be struggling with money. At the end of the day, at the end of the month, you'll be struggling to pay salaries. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to a bank, but you don't have a bank account. Why? Because you transact with cash. How do we find solutions that can assist us in ensuring that the entire ecosystem, whether it's a formal bank, whether it's a bank that comes from a fintech company, or any other institution of similar magnitude, to basically assist and ensure that there's a cohesive and synergized process of knowing that this person needs credit, they can afford it, or they are just struggling for this month, etc., and the likes, and ensure that the economy basically grows in that regard. Now, from a regulator's perspective, there's massive issues. With this, you can leave South Africa, go to Kenya as an example. Just to move money between the two countries, it becomes a problem. We've had issues where money is supposed to come into the country, where we've serviced an international client, and basically the funds are withheld for like a whole month because there are regulations and processes and checks to confirm that this is a legitimate transaction, etc., and the likes. How do we get to a point where not necessarily relaxing some of these regulations, but making them more efficient? How can fintech companies assist in these exercises? Because formalizing it or basically containerizing it to the bank in terms of how they obviously operate in that space becomes a bit of a challenge. How can there be unity between the banks and financial institutions or informal banking institutions, in essence, to basically work together and speak with one voice to assist in this regard? One of the banks is our client as well, and we were assisting them with similar process that we actually encountered as an issue where money comes into the country and there are delays in that process, only to find that some of these processes, it's a matter of, it's just a manual issue. There's too many people where this money has to basically be signed off by to basically get to a point where we are able to basically receive the money. And just automating that process basically assists. the entire process, making it shorter and ensuring that we obviously are still secure and it's a legitimate transaction that obviously has happened in that regard. Now, back to my helper. What could she have done different to ensure that the money arrives safely in Zimbabwe? I'm starting the questions on my side. Can anybody assist with an answer to this? Anyone? Yep. Send it via electronically. With which platform? Okay. Sorry, I think maybe just for the audience to catch you, maybe just if you don't mind to repeat your answer.
I was just sorry, that's very loud. I was just saying sent it electronically from her mobile device using a wallet solution, potentially a wallet solution that exists in this country and in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
A simple example is Mukuru, but she is very resistant to utilizing Mukuru as an example. There are other similar platforms, but why is that the case? It costs a lot to send money like that. If you're going to send 1,000 rand to Zimbabwe, they probably have to send actually 1,200 so that Mukuru take their 200 rand, and then they'll then receive the 1,000 rand on the other side. Now, this is a whole issue around sending money. Back to Malawi again. There's something called the black market. What is the black market? Black market basically means that somebody in South Africa who's a relative to somebody in Malawi is basically looking for money. What do they end up doing? They basically send the money to a relative this side who's supposed to send money to Malawi, and whoever is on that side will then send the money back to the other person. What does that do? Bypasses the entire banking system. Is it legal? I don't know. But that is how a lot of countries or a lot of transactions are currently happening. But the question still stays, why are they not sending it via mobile transactions? Where are the banks in this conversation? What are they actually doing in this space? Now, there's a lot of education that is required. But now, how do we bridge that gap? How do we understand that from a adoption perspective, a lot of people can basically understand that technology is the way of doing things? Simple example, my mother will never use her FNB banking app. She'll never do it. She trusts money. She would rather go to an ATM, withdraw money, and send it back into the ATM to basically transfer it across. But she has an FNB bank app in her palm, but she doesn't do that. A lot of these are cultural ways of doing things, or there's been a level of trust in certain processes. How do you now break that trust to basically ensure that you are able to think or rather approach moving money or transacting in a different way? Now, financial and digital literacy are key factors to building inclusiveness and financial resilience. How do we ensure that we are able to include everyone that is unbanked? Ensure that from one country to another, the banking processes basically work. I think, like I said, I have more questions than answers in this presentation, and I hope that some of these questions will be answered by the following speakers as well as panelists as well in that regard. With that said, I'll open the floor for any questions. Yeah.
Hi, Lerato.
Hi.
Morning, everyone. I have two questions, so I'm not helping you with the answer part.
Are you going to provide the answers as well?
No. So my first question is, what would you say to incumbent banks that don't see much incentive to share financial data with third parties? I mean, they might argue that over time they have spent costs to collect the data, to store the data, to make sure that it's secure, and they continue, saving it or storing it on the cloud, that comes at a cost. So what incentive do they have to share, this data with fintechs that possess a threat in their businesses? So that's my first question.
Okay, cool. You want to answer that? Okay, let me answer that one. It's a tricky one. I think a lot of the banks actually have that view to say that we've collected this data over time. Why do we have to obviously share it for free? In essence, I don't think the conversation is around should it be shared for free. There could be obviously a levy of sorts in that space, but to my earlier point, why are banks also afraid to basically share that data? At the end of the day, whose data is it? Yes, you've accumulated that data, but in essence, the entire data that's sitting there is Lerato's data. It's not Absa's data. It's not Standard Bank's data. Why are they still afraid to basically open that up? And they've started that, to be honest, but it's not at a good pace and as such. So what I would say to them in that regard is, it's about time they change, and hence I started by saying that we now need to start thinking differently. We might have been seeing things in a certain way, but it's about time that we actually see how things obviously change. The fintech revolution is here. It's not going to go away. It's assisting a lot of companies in this space, and it's assisting a lot of the population as well, to basically ensure that there's a level of competition, there's a level of making sure that you are not the only person that is basically offering that service and opening that up. A simple example is a person that is unbanked. How do you ensure that you adopt them to basically be banked if they have a certain mindset? It could be through a third-party company where you basically have opened that data up. And at the end of the day, the banks will still be there in some shape, form, or another, right? But it's a matter of how do we now open that up to the greater public. Yep.
Thanks. Sorry, can I just, one last question,
Sure.
sorry. So I like the unified compliance framework idea, but how would that practically work, considering that each country has its different regulations and, they, from a data point of view, they might want to localize it. So how does that practically play out?
That's another difficult one. We have what we call the GNU, Government of National Unity. Each and every party has their own view of how to do things. But at the end of the day, the country still needs to be ran. Each and every country in Africa will obviously have their own mandates and processes, and they would want to basically do things in their own way. Unfortunately, it still has to come down to we have to open up the conversation. We have to start engaging, and that's the only way we can obviously find synergies in terms of working together as Africa. Otherwise, we'll always be segregated as countries, where other European countries and the likes are working together, opening up their borders to a certain degree. Sorry, I'm not being political, but there's a lot of work that is being done by other countries where fintech, simple example, there's a company called Setu in India. They've been in this space for the longest time from an open banking perspective. South Africa is quite behind, right? But it's because the government also assisted in those regulations to ensure that they work with startups, with fintech companies to assist them in that regard. We have to then talk to ourselves, the regulators. I think we do have a few regulators in the audience as well. How can they start those conversations with other regulators in other countries to find synergies? I think that's the only way it could obviously practically work. And hey, it will be a touch and go. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, unfortunately. Yep.
Thanks, Lerato.
Good.
How
you doing?
I think you touched on a number of key challenges that we're experiencing in different markets. Obviously, each market or each operating country would have...
Sorry, man, I can't hear you that clear.
You can't hear me?
Okay, I can hear now.
There are nuances in different countries that are specific to those countries. You mentioned earlier, which I completely agree with, that there's literacy and educational campaigns that need to be undertaken to solve some of these problems. However, there's one element I think you just alluded to now before I raised my hand, regulation. And I remember making the same point last year when attending the same conference, that regulation can sometimes open up opportunities to close that gap. And I'll give you an example. In Nigeria, when there was an issue with cash, regulator had to step in. And that created an aggressive adoption of e-currency in Nigeria. That's why transactions on e-currency or e-commerce platform in Nigeria have taken off. The same can be applicable in different markets. We need the voice of regulators to also understand that they can open up these opportunities. A lot is being done by the banks, a lot is being done by fintechs and telcos like us. However, if the regulatory environment is not conducive to creating opportunities for adoption, then we'll still be having the same conversation next year or in the near future.
No, 100%. I think I can see that I'm already being kicked off the stage. I'll just agree with you. You're 100% correct. And unfortunately, if the regulators, like you're saying, are not going to start those conversations and basically kick off the processes of ensuring that we kind of align as multiple countries, yeah, we'll definitely be stuck in the same place year after year. And yeah, should I take another question?
We need to move on because we've got a lot to get through. So perhaps an opportunity for the two of you to connect. I think there was a question up here as well, an opportunity to connect as well.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to grab 2 minutes quickly?
Sure, thanks. I'm going to be very quick on this. How do you build the trust? How do you make sure that people start using the devices? Because that doesn't make sense, right? And secondary to that, how do you get all the people that know how to use the devices to stop going around and going into the grey market so that they stop paying tax? Because that's another conundrum that's in this whole scheme.
I don't have an answer to that. I won't lie. I tried to convince my own mother. So it's a very difficult one. But yes, everything comes down to trust. And if we obviously can't get that right, the adoption is going to be tricky. But I'll say this, I think the younger generation or the generation that's obviously up and coming right now, they are more digitally savvy. And unfortunately, we'll have to drive that transformation through them as opposed to trying to convince my mother to basically use a digital banking app. Cool.
Lerato, thanks very much. Round of applause for Lerato Bodibe. Thank you. Thanks very much.